Are you looking for one history book that can help you make sense of the confusing events in geopolitics today? The history-changing events that seem to be occurring, the rise and fall of great powers like America and China. Well, this video is a recommendation to you about one highly acclaimed book. It's one genuine scholarly piece of history that can make sense of geopolitics today. And that book is by John Darwin, and it is called After Tamerlane, The Rise and Fall of Global Empires, 1400 to 2000. It is a fantastic book, and I really recommend everyone read it if they really want to make sense of world events today, because the whole shape of the history that he describes is really still with us today, and he, if you like, sets out what the real chessboard that the great powers are playing on. The great powers of America, China, Russia, etc., the European Union, India, which are really, if you like, successors to former empires. John Darwin taught the history of empires at Cambridge University for many years. I think he's now a professor emeritus or retired. And his book After Tamerlane comes from 2007, and it's still, widely available, easily picked up at any bookshop, because it is an absolutely brilliant book and well worth picking up. And I've got a link to where you can get that book yourself online in the description below, so do check that out. He's also written a history of the British Empire and a wonderful book about the port cities of the world in the 19th century. And in a nutshell, his book After Tamerlane provides a worldly, realistic yet scholarly overview of world history since 1400, when Tamerlane aspired to rule the world. Tamerlane was Timur the Lame, the sort of Mongol successor, Mongol sort of emperor, Timurid emperor, who conquered a large part of Eurasia in the 1300s and early 1400s. By the time of Tamerlane's death in 1405, he had conquered most of the world island of Eurasia, but still had not imposed a single political order amid competing empires. And Tamerlane becomes Darwin's governing metaphor for his book. There has been no single international order, no common vision or shared liberal intellectual assumptions between competing empires, no liberal rules-based order, if you like. Those empires, those great states, have risen and fallen, waxed and waned, imploded and recovered in response to fickle, changeable circumstances, and in ways that only with unreliable hindsight seem to be a story of progress or the rise of Western civilization. This assumption from John Darwin about both the persistence of empires, the sort of neutral common characteristics of empires, and the underpinning sort of human historical need for political integration through empires leads to a remarkable narrative of contending empires competing with different resources and different visions of modernity. There is no one story of the emergence of one single modern world. This story is very different from the accounts of the rise of the West, which dominate most of the versions of history that, make their way into geopolitical analysis and that dominate the economic schools of the world. In the journalistic accounts of the, post-Cold War world order. And Darwin's story is remarkable for making clear how open the future was for these contending empires between 1400 and 2000. There was no really predestined outcome. There was no end of history. And in contrast to complacent assumptions about the pillars of Western thought or the genius apps of Western civilization, as the British historian Neil Ferguson talked about, John Darwin tells how, and again I quote, "In practice and for reasons that we are far from understanding fully, for almost 2 centuries after 1750, it was Northwest European societies and their transatlantic offspring, that is, America, that mobilized resources and people fastest and also coped best with the social and political strains that being mobile imposed. Far-flung empires and a global economy shaped to their interests were to be their reward." The societies of the West, of Northwest European societies, which you could probably include Russia in, were able to make the most of the opportunities and the chaos of the period in the late 18th century. But that reward was not a permanent prize, nor a temple of Western virtue and Western civilization. For example, the British Empire was made out of private enterprise, commerce, Christianity, missionaries and civilization. And its dominance in the 19th century was powered by cotton, coal and capital. It would discover in the 1950s and 1960s that it was no longer a world power on a par with the USA and the Soviet Union. It had been eclipsed by its transatlantic offspring and its old continental enemy in the bipolar world of the post-war international order. Another of these far-flung empires, the transatlantic offspring of Northwest Europe, the United States, and yes, the United States did have an empire, still has an empire, would draw some stranger lessons from the history of empires. Like a millenarian visionary, it would believe that it had made a decisive break from this tainted history of imperial rule. But John Darwin is not fooled. Empires are still empires when they are not ruled as the Romans did, nor as the Europeans, and Darwin relates the bare facts, the commercial presence, the cultural influence of global media, and more than 700 military bases in over 130 countries of the world. The post-1945 American system of international order was thus imperial in all but name. It was the empire that dared not speak its name and yet believed itself to be the indispensable nation. And like its imperial ancestors and imperial rivals, the American order owed to chance and conflicts its decades of dominance, not some unique American Republican virtue. As John Darwin argues, it was the Second World War that made the United States not just the world's largest economy, but also its strongest. It was the global Cold War that made it the world's greatest military power. These were the assets with which America entered the globalized world at the end of the century. So John Darwin concludes his great book with some very different reflections on the global world order than most of the advocates of the liberal rules-based order. The economic regime of the post-Cold War era is the great exception in the history of the global economy. John Darwin writes, it was produced by an earthquake as dramatic as anything in the world's modern history. And by that he means the geopolitical collapse of Soviet power and China's embrace under Deng Xiaoping of a capitalist economy. These two enormous events created massive new markets, and at the same time dramatic changes in transport, air travel and the shipping container revolution, and communications, the internet and digital communications, mobile digital communications, created conditions for remarkable growth and integration of economics worldwide. It redistributed wealth across the world. And as Darwin writes, the great divergence in wealth and economic performance between the Euro-Atlantic West and most of the rest of Eurasia has given way instead to the great convergence, which should, if it continues, restore the balance to the rough equilibrium of half a millennium ago in the next 50 years. But economic integration is not a bulwark against the building of empires, states, and cultures with distinctive values, attitudes, institutions, and ideologies. And John Darwin's book is a brilliant account of all the different contending, diverse empires that sought to shape the Eurasian and the world order over the period 1400 to 2000. China, Mughal India, the British Empire, the American Empire, the Soviet Union, the Germany, the African states, events in the Americas as well. So with this understanding of the openness and the diversity and the driving forces and the complexity of history shaping geopolitics, you can insulate yourself against some bad lessons from history that people will commonly draw if they are less, if they haven't read John Darwin's After Tamerlane. And if you do read John Darwin's After Tamerlane, you will perhaps get a better understanding of both the significance and the possibilities of the fall of the liberal rules-based order. John Darwin concludes his great book, which, was published in 2007 and written perhaps in the height of the rhetoric of the globalized world, of the forward march of globalization in the 1990s and early 2000s. John Darwin wrote his great book by finally making clear the precise meaning of his title, After Tamerlane. In a final section entitled Tamerlane's Shadow, he makes these judgments on the constant breaking apart of dreams of a new world order. Perhaps this is the point, he writes. It might well be true that we are on the brink of a great transformation in geopolitics, economics, and culture, at least as far-reaching as the Eurasian Revolution of the late 18th century. If this is so, it can hardly be doubted that its impacts in different parts of the world will vary enormously. Rather than a fairy tale story of ascendant beliefs in liberal democracy and globalization, John Darwin and after Tamerlane offers a deep historical understanding of how our world came to be as it is in its confusing, disordered state. It emerges from an exceptionally complex kaleidoscope that Darwin helps the general reader to peer through. And through this glass we see fractals of trade and conquest, diaspora and migration, changing maps and dynamic regions, interwoven cultures and internecine politics. It is a vision that engenders skepticism towards pop theories of history and pop theories of global world orders. Globalization, all these complex effects of contending empires, John Darwin writes, their effect has been not to homogenize the world, but to keep it diverse. By contrast, the magnetic force of the global economy has been too erratic thus far and too unevenly felt to impose the cooperative behaviour and cultural fusion to which theorists of free trade have often looked forward to. What we call globalization today might be candidly seen as flowing from a set of recent agreements, some tacit, some formal, between the four great economic empires of the contemporary world: America, Europe, Japan, and China. 15 years later, you'd probably add in Russia. For them and for all other states and societies, the challenge will be to reconcile their internal cohesion with the disturbing effects of free competition. The strain will be great, the outcome uncertain. But if there is one continuity that we should be able to glean from a long view of the past, it is Eurasia's resistance to a uniform system, a single great ruler, or one set of rules. In that sense, we still live in Tamerlane's shadow, or perhaps more precisely in the shadow of his failure. So that is After Tamerlane. Highly recommend this book. Really great read. It's not an easy read, but it's once you get the basic idea and take it patiently, because there's an awful lot of knowledge to absorb in it. But if you flow through, if you just take it patiently, it is perhaps the best book you can read to understand the complexity of geopolitics today and the openness of the potential outcomes as the world shifts from the post-Cold War order into some new kind of set of arrangements that will be more diverse than imagined in thinkers of the liberal rules-based order. Well, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you're into history, if you're into geopolitics, if you're into culture, if you're into books and reading, I hope you can check out my channel for more good stuff. And if you found this account of John Darwin's book helpful, I I'll be publishing a longer written form of this essay in my book From the Burning Archive, which will be available as an ebook from the 28th of November 2022, and a print book very shortly after. And I will put links below to them if you'd like to help me out by buying that book. And do follow me on YouTube, like and subscribe and share. You can follow me on Twitter, and you can also check out the links below to all my other content, including the Burning Archive podcast and my books. So thanks a lot for listening.